This episode was recorded on December 14th, 2025. Hey everyone, in our most recent episode, we talked about bubble dynamics and the vibe shift and a couple other things, and we still have episodes planned for that. But this episode is going to be a little different and focus on an update that Igor had regarding AI. We'll also cover how this changes and impacts the analysis that we've done on this show. Welcome to Muckrakers, where we dig through the latest happenings around so-called AI. In each episode, we highlight recent events, contextualize the most important ones, and try to separate muck from meaning. I'm your host, Jacob Hames, and joining me is my co-host, Igor Kravchuk.
Thanks, Jacob. This week we're talking about how I became an AI booster.
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
I didn't become a full-on AI booster, of course, but I was a bit shook by the latest Claude Code release and by a thing we ran at our company. And I figured it would be good to talk about both like my update on this, just to like remain credible, because I've been like the stronger AI hater of the two of us, I think. And also about how like it doesn't change the points we're making if the AI is not completely useless. Because that's going to be an argument that's going to try to be made, like that, oh, it's good at coding now, so all of the critiques are washed away.
Sure. So I guess before we get into it then, just to provide context as to like why you want to do this, why is it valuable that we talk about this and then put it in an episode, right? What are we actually adding to here?
Yeah, so one thing that I think we're trying to do as a general rule is that we want to give like a technically grounded, like realistic assessment of a situation. And then because the situation is, in our assessment, objectively horrible, we critique it and we point to what should be done to make it not horrible. And in order for that to be credible, you can't strawman. So like one of the things that is often, I think, like maybe in the emotional core correct, but misguided critique is pointing at generative AI models and saying that, oh, but they can't create graphic designs the way that humans can, which is true, but it misses the point of why people are adopting them, or saying, oh, these things will never be able to solve this puzzle that I give it, therefore they're not useful at all. Like these types of arguments, you see them sometimes in the like AI critic space, and they're not really like the core, like grasping at the utility why people adopt the systems. Like the reason why I was a very strong critic of vibe coding and all of these things, even when I was hedging it a bit, there's some place for it, but overall I was like a big hater and I didn't like using it, was because it genuinely, I didn't see the total net time saving. And we had talked about these studies, the one by the Danish researcher, that this is like not only my anecdotal evidence, it's also like a general thing, that what time you save in getting your one-shot vibe coding, you need to spend integrating it and debugging it, because now you don't have a mental model for it.
And I think that's not just in the study. There's also been people, even like relatively recently, saying, the change in vibe coding results in shifting that extra work. You then have to work backwards and understand it from a different perspective, someone who didn't write it. And that just takes a lot more time. And also, if you actually care about how it works, it's more likely that there's an error that you don't necessarily catch on a first pass because you don't understand how something is happening or have as much context as to like what triggers something else. So I think that is like meaningful. And I would say that is still hampering a vast majority of the utility there. But there is a section, and maybe this is what you're talking about, where if you do just want to have a relatively simple functionality or output, like a dashboard kind of thing, you can actually get that relatively, compared to how much work you would have put in if you were coding it from the ground up, it is faster in some ways. Is that sort of what you're talking about? And maybe you can give a little bit more context as to what the catalyst was for this update for you.
Yeah, so like the way I would phrase it, like, there has always been a little bubble of tasks where you could get value out of these LLMs. In the very beginning, it was basically like autocompletes, which is why like cursor and so on became a big thing. And I think that's still like one of the ways people really like using it, because you're constantly mini correcting. I'm even skeptical about how much time you save there, to be honest, but it's one of the things that felt the most useful for people already. The
Mm-hmm.
one step bigger and like more long context cohesion requiring was demos or mockups or single shot, let me try to hack something up mini tools. And that's been the thing that basically drives the actual like vibe coding boom, where you have a problem, you want to quickly have a solution, you sit down, you don't care about the code, you just want like to upload a CSV and get it formatted in a different way or whatever your task is. And for that, sometimes they could already do it. Sometimes you got it in a one shot. Sometimes you got it after 10 hours of prompting and it would have been faster to do it by hand.
Hmm.
But that existed already, and it existed more in web shit, like more common tasks that are very boilerplate. And with every model update,
Yeah.
they've been pushing that out. And also, various different trends converge. Like the inference gets faster, so they can do more of the chain of thought token, or they can do more rollouts, and they integrate better tooling into the Claude Code client, and they have the prompt better optimized, and a lot of different little knobs get tuned to make it better and better every stage. And what caused kind of
Sure.
like my shift is that like with the latest version of Claude Code and the Opus 4.5 release, it got actually useful for me on things that are still basically boilerplate, but it's complicated boilerplate now. It's writing a parser that before I could still do LLM stuff, but it was like engineering effort and basically just a way of compiling a bunch of scripts into a particular output. Now it's actually you describe what you want to the LLM, and with very few shots, it gets quite clear. And the thing that fully knocked me out of my previous position was at my work, we gave a text file, a CSV file containing a particular instrument readout without any headers and without any indication except the file name of what might be inside, and just gave a prompt, what can you do with this? Make something with this. And it's
Hmm.
one-shotted a very reasonable like viewer tool for this type of data, which isn't, it has reasoned it all out, because this type of data exists on the internet and it's discussed, and like the same type of tools exist already. So all of the components exist. I checked afterwards, but it's a very impressive like feat of recall for the like this sample from the distribution. So like the correct way of phrasing it, that like the amount of useful work that is now in distribution for this generative model has reached like a tipping point where I can genuinely see how, even if it becomes much more expensive, even if it stops now, there's like a core of utility that I think will be hard to go back from. Well, if this
Mm-hmm.
vanishes, it's gonna come again. Someone will build it again. Someone will like make it happen again, maybe with like fresh funding and without the research debt. And that kind of shifted my position on this now, and it has like a bunch of downstream effects on our analysis, which we're going to talk about.
Does it? Right? Like, that's sort of where I was at already, right? I agree with what you're saying. The amount of effort and capital at this point that has been put into these systems being able to do these tasks, making a little demo based on the CSV or things like that. I don't know. To me, that has always been something that I feel like eventually we'll get to a point where that might happen, or not might happen, will happen for certain data types and stuff. That's sort of what I mean when I say I'm not saying that this technology isn't useful. Like, it is useful, and that is a great example. The issue for me is much more about what it presents and how it changes the structure of thinking about these problems, because you go from going from the ground up and requiring a certain level of understanding of the thing that you're working with to not necessarily doing that, and therefore not necessarily understanding like the risks. And maybe that's true from the first way as well, but the likelihood is much higher that you are missing aspects of it. You don't realize that there's an edge case that is not accounted for, things like that. And yeah, I don't know, I totally get what you're saying, but I think that's where I was already at.
So for me, like, maybe you're just smarter and more prescient than me. So if anybody wants to take advice, ask Jacob, not me.
That's definitely not true. Just want to clarify
Like,
that one.
in the alternative explanation, or like maybe a complementary one, is for me there is a bit of a difference in the sense that I like it's about two things. It's about reliability, and it's about the how far can you get up the amount of input effort put into making the model better to useful work. Basically, I previously had a mental model that no matter how hard you push, but like a certain number of steps of not even that complex, just like volume of work is gonna be out of reach because of the argument I made in one of the previous episodes. That it was like a combinatorial explosion of like multiple steps, where like every step you go further along and every additional bit of context you have to keep in mind puts a larger burden on the model to stay cohesive and is another source of error. And because there's nothing that does like an actual cohesion check inside of a model, like humans have this, where like the symbols that we get from the outside, that we ground against, they force us back into a cohesion check. And the whole point of notation and math and external tooling, all of that stuff, is to help us with that. But at a very fundamental level, most humans don't spiral off into random output because we have an actual internal process. I said most humans. This is a very safe statement. and like I thought we would get this, and now this has kind of shifted for me because one, we've gotten much higher up the capability tree of just recall, where like they still make mistakes, like you said, but it's now at this tipping point where I am able to, without a lot of effort, create systems that deal with his stochasticity, and I can make a kind of like almost deterministically good output for a particular task happen without needing to manually supervise and without insane amount of cost. And that shifts this thing from casino, which was my previous kind of mental model of why people use this stuff, that like you pull the arm on the vibe coding multi-arm bandit, and then like you get your reward, and people don't do the math on what's actually working, to an actual useful tool consistently, as long as the domain is kind of like worth the effort of making it work to that degree, which will not be everything, but it has kind of like shifted the regime that I'm thinking about this stuff now, because we got higher up that capability tree than I thought was possible in this investment space. Sorry, now I'm done with like
Gotcha. So I think that the part that I highlight there is that you said without a certain amount of input into developing the prompt, or the way that you're inputting data, or the instructions that are being provided, or the tooling that you're using it and how it's being called. So essentially, without designing this system for your specific use case, then it's much more similar to what you had said initially. But now that isn't the case, and I would disagree with that. I would say that it's just that all of that work has been done for you by the language model providers. They have spent tons of money, tons of resources, tons of time on developing tools for this task. Not just developing tools for the systems to use, but also augmenting the training data and adjusting some of the other parameters that they're using to get this system to be what it is when you see it on the user facing end. And just because they've done that with one, like I've said before, it is valuable for this thing. But that doesn't mean that, yeah, it's valuable for anything right now, or even like is possible to do these things without having to essentially start from at least ground like one, right? Going back to almost square zero or square one or whatever, and restructuring things. Because like a lot of the data that's been provided and a lot of how the system has been orchestrated is to be able to do these tasks with higher confidence.
Yeah, totally. Like this, just to be clear, like I'm not an AI booster, like in the strong sense, and this doesn't change like the AGI argument, for example. We're gonna get to that. For me, it's like a quite big shift because it's like actually like a regime shift, not a phase transition. Jacob has a blog post about that. This is a different thing, but yeah, what you're saying is basically correct. Like that's also one of the reasons why I want to talk about this, because just the thing being useful now doesn't validate the claims by the people building it who have been saying it was useful all the time. Because the story, like you said, I'm going to basically paraphrase what you said. The story was that we trained this thing on data and RL the hell out of it, and then just by scaling it up, or because AI self-recursively improves itself, we're going to get general usefulness. And we don't have that. What we have is like the Anthropic and only Anthropic has optimized the fuck out of Claude Code, the software, not only the model, but like the software piece. And the combination of local indexing, efficient local interpreter, a bunch of other stuff, combined with prompt engineering, combined with all of their little hacks that we talked about, with like skills and plugins and sub-agents and tool calling and all of this other stuff, all of these different ways of humans engineering a system and fine-tuning that stuff together has barely, after billions of investment, yielded a tool now where I say, yeah, pretty useful. I can make this work. I am good at wrangling stochastic systems that say I can make this work now. And because I'm an expert in what I'm trying to do, I could do this by hand, would be much harder. But like all of that stuff is still required for it to be useful. It's not at all this is not generally useful case, but they're gonna sell it as such, and people should pay attention to like what actually happened. So that's like one of the ways where it does change the analysis, though, is like what we're talking about is like for the extrapolation and for was this a grift or not? Did it deliver or not? Can we trust what they're saying? Is the assessment of the technology that they're pushing the right one? Like this is kind of epistemic and decision-making questions. From an economic side, it doesn't matter. Like what does change there is like if the economics work out and the task you're trying to do can be transformed into a rote task. It doesn't need to be a formalized task. It doesn't even need to be a verifiable task. It just needs to be a rote task.
And can you just clarify for me what you mean by rote there?
I was discussing this a bit with a friend over the weekend. A rote task is a task that might change every time you do it. So that it's never exactly the same task, but it stays very close to a single mode of like a trajectory. So in the sense that like if you squint and if you are able to kind of like see high-level patterns, it is very clear that it is a very like repeatable task where given the same input you would do the same thing. It's just about having that recall, and you don't need to think once you've started it. If you have to look at what you're doing and adjust and then like actually pay attention, it's not a rote task. Like a rote task is something where you can safely turn your brain off and you just execute the thing.
Can you give me an example of a rote task and a non-rote task, just to, again, to make sure that I'm fully understanding like where you're coming from?
So
here,
one rote task would be given a set of objects, like in a taxonomy of things. So like imagine like a blog management system. Like giving that we want to have pages and blog posts and comments and users and avatars and tracebacks, like all of these kind of objects that we need to keep track of, and images. I give you that list. Make me a CRUD app, create, read, update, delete, to implement that content management system. At this point, there exists kind of like a default way of doing this, where if once you have defined what you want to manage and a bit like what each of these things do, it's what is also called like making widgets. Like it is a technical task because you need to be able to like understand the specification and then execute them and do things in a certain way that it will come together safely. But without additional requirements like high performance, it's not a thinking task because you just do the standard thing. You have a lot of margins and you're done.
Sure. Okay. And then the
then
non-rote task example
would be talking to the customer and making the taxonomy. Because sure, most customers will want something very similar. You can probably work off like a similar one. And if you constrain and engineer your system enough, if you, for example, say you only accept customers in a certain bucketing system that you have, you might turn it into a rote task because then you can guarantee that it will cover everything. But without further constraints, like the customer will have like a small tweak that maybe isn't covered by your distribution. And then you're back to either thing where it's slop and the customer gets slop, so they're not expecting quality. And so they just accept that their stuff gets ignored. Or if you go to like a higher stakes thing, they would be pissed at you because like your system doesn't work.
Sure. Right. And okay, so then the next sort of jump here is you're saying, okay, well, it seems that based on this, your update, that a rote task can be automated when there is enough data and enough effort is put into the tooling behind it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also tasks that don't appear to be rote tasks right now. If people want to predict what like AI can do in the future, is like what task can you transform into rote task? Like where can you extract the like decision making from the task? If you can extract all of the like real-time high stakes decision making from it, then it becomes LLMable, basically. Give me enough effort.
And I would also say that that is with a caveat of if you actually care about the output and or integrating it with something, you as the person would still need to validate it, right? And then at that point, it becomes questionable again. So if you don't need to have high confidence in it, I guess is sort of what I'm saying. That's also a caveat, at least from how I see it.
Yeah. So this is also an important thing for the impact of this. This is not, oh my God, LLMs will replace programmers. This is programmers will be expected to orchestrate LLMs and to basically become very good at like giving specs and validating specs and maybe like reaching in and hotfixing something, but like basically everyone needs to be a senior programmer that is wrangling interns. That's like the shift that comes out of it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's actually very helpful for me in terms of understanding what your update consists of. I do feel like it actually ends up making you more aligned with like how I was thinking, which is funny. So I think we just touched on the financial like ish. It required a massive amount of investment in order to get to this point. It also required the right kind of data, and it also is still a lie, right? Like it still isn't what was promised. It isn't what people were saying it was going to be. And so I think there is a small update in terms of the finances, but it still to me looks like a bubble. Like the internet is also a great technology, right? No, I don't think the internet is garbage. Like I love the internet. I think it's awesome. And yet there was a bubble.
It's a lot of garbage, but we're all just garbage gremlins.
Yeah. But like also the core functionality of the internet is not like the internet part of the internet is not garbage. It's the stuff that's on the internet.
So I think like the update is before, and we talked about this a bit in some of the episodes we talked about the financing is like before it was like this is a demo technology. The payoff for like serious engineers is not really there. It's probably not worth it if you have to run it at cost. There's no way this could ever pay itself back. And the update I would make is it's still a bubble. It's still gonna cause a crash and so on. But there's a like chance that all of the current contenders might survive if they raise enough money. Like if they go public early enough, if they raise enough cash basically to survive the restructuring from a massive growth and research grift to extremely specialized and extremely powerful like tooling for making software systems or for making like
Sure.
data manipulation systems.
Yeah.
And that is a small update, right? That
Oh,
is like from OpenAI and Anthropic and so on are fucked to they might have a chance.
okay, I see. Okay, no, that does help me. I guess I'm still a little more skeptical, although my model of like the financial side is probably much worse than yours as well. So
I mean,
yeah, I guess that
I
does
think
also
it's more
like
like
inform the OpenAI and Anthropic rumors of having an IPO in the near future, and also like with the most recent release of Gemini's model, OpenAI lost a significant chunk of its user base, and they're in like code red mode or something like that, some dumb way to describe it. And also, even like to some extent, makes the Trump executive order like make sense, right? If you can prolong the bubble long enough to pass it off to someone else, essentially to cash out early and make the company profitable.
so like there was also a rumor that OpenAI hasn't finished a pre-training run since late 2024. Everything since then has been basically post-training. This came out of like a semi-analysis side comment, and it wasn't denied as of 11 days ago. And it basically means, okay, like they have a kind of proven product market fit now that they can sell to people. They can sell it to decision makers. They can sell it to the public if
Ad
they.
companies.
That's a separate thing. We can like, just the coding part. They can sell that angle,
Oh, sure.
and there's still this like idea of, oh, this is going to take over the whole economy because the disappointment hasn't spread wide enough yet. But like I said, like people are abandoning pilots, people are shrinking their investment, people are getting nervous, and it also becomes clear that the winner take all market isn't happening because, like I said, like Google is back. People, in my opinion, were stupidly dismissing them because they don't realize that Google makes more profit than OpenAI has ever fundraised and earned
Yeah.
together per year.
Yeah.
Like it was, they were always gonna come
The
back
number of
from this.
people that are from Google at like NeurIPS is just wild. This year, actually, Anthropic and OpenAI both had papers that they actually participated on that were peer reviewed at the conference, which I was very pleasantly surprised to see. But like it just pales in comparison to what Google is putting out, and they're not putting out most of their good stuff.
And then on top of that, you have like Mistral, who just released their like latest Desktop thing that is like very competitive and people are happy with it because it's much cheaper. So like the winner take all market story is kind of like running away. They still have the story of like OpenAI branding is the best branding, but we talked about the Pew Research in the last episode or in the one before, but people don't like OpenAI that much. So they're
And people
definitely
don't
trying.
like AI that much.
They're definitely trying to cash in as much as they can. And the thing that you said about the
Yeah.
ad is the same thing, that they really need to make this happen to have a story, but at the same time, people just finding strings related to ads in the APK, so like the Android binaries in the latest update, triggered such a shitstorm that they rolled it back, and people getting app suggestions in the app triggered such a shitstorm. So like people really don't want ads in their ChatGPT. It's not the same as Google, at least like seemingly status now.
Yet, I think is to me that just implies they haven't figured out the way to do it yet. Like for a fact that they are working on the, and actually I know for a fact, like I'm not even like I've talked to someone who is on a team for personalization evaluations on Google. So of course he isn't the one that's like doing this for ads, but like the reason that they are doing that is for ads.
No, I meant like people accept it with Google because they're used to it from Google. People will accept this
Oh
also
no, yeah, I
from
know.
the Google AI. In ChatGPT, like it's basically, yes, they might have a better brand and people like it more than Gemini for now. But the second their AI boyfriend suggests products to them in a way that is like legally doable, clearly marked as ads, they're gonna fucking hate it. At least status now. And so OpenAI is basically in a hard spot where maybe they will make it. Like they have billions of dollars, who knows? But the update we were talking about doesn't change that it's still like the current bubble, to my assessment, is still a bubble because the data center issues, the externalities that we talked about and are going to talk about are still the same. The copyright infringement and intellectual property violations and lawsuits related to that are still the same.
So before we get to externalities, because that is something I definitely want to hit before we end our discussion today, I think more related to maybe the bubble is that like the idea of AGI is still bullshit, right? Like
Yeah,
this is a tool that has been optimized for a specific use, and the idea that this technology could be general just, I don't know, it gets me irritated just thinking about it, right? Because it's all a marketing scheme.
like it's worth saying, like what happened here with Cosmic Shift was not, oh my god, it's generalizing now, AGI might be real. What was Cosmic Shift was like, oh my god, they managed to put enough of the manifold that I care about into the model that I can use this now, and they have to do the same
Yeah.
amount of effort that they did for coding in other domains, which might not be possible because like one big thing is that like computer scientists love to think that they're special and unique, but like coding and computer science is not that difficult compared to lab work. Because if something breaks, you have a chance of finding the unique deterministic root cause, which just doesn't exist in the real world. So you literally
Yeah.
cannot do the same type of effort that was done for coding and like fixed benchmarks as you would need to do for like the real world. And like
And there's also
that,
just a lot more data on the coding stuff because
yeah,
it is in a format that can go online very easily.
there was actually a good discussion on this by some Substack person. Like, you need the pre-training data to get like the representations of the thing that you're trying to learn on, and then you can try to do RL if you have basically free trial evaluations. So, like, if for code you can do this, you can actually give it like a coding prompt. You can have a model through some clever prompt harnessing set up. Write me a test for this problem, and then like a human reads the test and says yes, this is a valid test, and then like you let the LLM write code until it passes the test, and you use like the whole sample of feedback that you have from a human from that process to train the next iteration, and you repeat this. Like this is like a way of quite scalably getting a lot of signal on coding, because you can have a machine that was made by humans deterministically check, does this work or not, basically. First the
Yeah.
computer, then you test, and so on. For real world stuff, you always have to make this massive harness, at which point you're no longer working on an LLM, you're working on like the formalization of a physical world. And that's not impossible. Like again, like anything that can be made a rote task and be broken down into these like brainless components can probably be turned into that thing. And Honda is doing it in their robotics facilities right now. And there's a whole batch of humanoid robot startups trying to do this, because then they can reuse YouTube videos as pre-training. By having the robot look like a human, you can reuse human video as pre-training. But like it still is a whole separate effort, a whole separate machinery, and the AGI part gets completely lost.
Yeah.
Externalities, to cap this off, like those stay the same.
Yeah. That's is that all we have to say? Because it just
Yeah,
doesn't
like
affect externalities at all. Like any of the analysis that we've done regarding artists and like loss of jobs that paid the bills for them or journalists, the copyright infringement, the increase of data centers, and just like massive energy consumption in the creation and use of these systems, all of that doesn't change at all.
The only thing that changes is like the ROI calculation for some people because they're not facing the externalities, or like maybe some municipalities. And another not change because of an update, but just because it happened. The German association that handles audio copyright won a court case against, I think it was OpenAI. Yeah, it was OpenAI, which might set a precedent in the EU about what they can and cannot do and claim like the equivalent of fair use. So
Interesting.
they found that the
But
models
like, what's that actually gonna do? Like, can they actually make anything change because of that? Can they make people take down their models and things?
they basically need to show against like court order level certainty that they can do like unlearning or they have excluded the copyright material from the training data.
Gotcha. Unlearning is like super fragile though. Why'd they go with that?
And there might be damages as well, which will be negotiated
Okay.
later. But they have been found basically, like specifically, they found that lyrics are stored in the model, and when the model outputs those lyrics on user prompt, and the data and text mining exception does not apply because substantial parts of predicate works appear in outputs. And so basically, normally they would be able to claim like an output, they were banking on that, but that doesn't fly. And that means they basically need to show that they don't train the latest model on copyrighted texts if they want to deploy it in Germany. And if this basically catches on, then like it gives copyright holders leverage, at least in Europe, to either force a licensing deal out of OpenAI or degrade the capability of ChatGPT to interact with copyright material, which I think is important because it diminishes the commercial utility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So,
like
like,
we all know that these systems are trained on copyrighted data, and for that reason, I think it's probably not feasible that they could create similar systems if they were to actually remove copyrighted data. And so they'll go for the unlearning approach. Now, I have my issues with that because I don't think that is actually sufficient. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I guess.
a person from my old lab actually has a paper on this that gradient ascent fails to forget, which we can put
Yeah.
into the show notes. So this is all that I would have on this topic. I would be curious if anyone who's listening to this wants to send us their take on whether this is like an actual update for them or whether they thought this was trivial. If it was an update, what their personal takeaway from also the implications that we discussed would be. Yeah, but for me this was like mainly like a personal update and transparency and chance to discuss current events episode.
No, yeah, I think it'd be great to hear as well. I'm just thinking about what is it that is the takeaway here.
The takeaway is that not all that glitters is gold, and not all that looks useful is actually useful in the way that it is claimed, and AGI is still bullshit. And people should keep pushing back against the storytelling and grifting that is enabled by the AGI narrative as tech encircles the commons and tries to pass it off as building like some grand future of super intelligence that's gonna save us all, when really they're just like trying to devalue labor as much as possible.
And that's all the muck that we have for this week. If you like the show, please share it and give us a review. Written review is actually the best thing you can do because those algorithms on the podcast listening platforms really like the written reviews. So please leave us one if you don't mind. And we will see you next time.